Welcome to Flipping Tables, where we bring all of our religious thinking to Jesus, who flips the table for his upside-down kingdom. I'm Julie Sexton, and I'll be your host. Welcome to Season 2, Episode 10. In each episode, I'm joined by one or more co-hosts, and today I'm joined once again by my friend and favorite Bible teacher, Mary Beth, and we will be discussing John chapter 9. And Mary Beth will take the lead at both the podcast and the study table, and you may be wondering right off the bat, what is she talking about with all these tables? So when you listen to the podcast, you are joining us at Table 1. And Table 2 is what I call the study table. I send out a weekly study email corresponding with each podcast episode so that you can grow deeper in the chapter of John that we discussed on the podcast. But wait, we're going to add a third table. In April, we will invite our local friends to join us at the third table. And Table 3 will be an opportunity to gather for food, fellowship, and be a part of a flourishing community. And I have been saving Table 3 in the John study because I wanted to bring this out when we hit the upper room discourse. So the majority, if not all, of John 13 through 17 unfolded around a table. Just Jesus and his disciples. So stay tuned, friends, because there are more details that will be coming soon, and I am excited to add a third table. And I hope that's the last table because I don't know how many more tables I can meet at, Mary Beth. So welcome to the table.
Thank you. Glad to be back with you, Julie.
Yes, I appreciate you coming and discussing what I think is one of our favorite John chapters.
Without a doubt.
Yeah, it's a good one. And I bet you love the upper room discourse too.
I do. I think chapter 9 and chapter 17 and chapter 4 are my favorite 3 in John.
Yes. So we got you in for 4, now 9.
Yes.
And so I'll just pray fervently that the Lord would move you back to 17. Because there is something about that high priestly prayer.
Yes.
It is. Holy, holy, holy. It is a 3-part holy, right?
Exactly.
I love that so much. Yes. Well, you also went to If Gathering.
Yes.
And we stayed at the same hotel and we never laid eyes on each other.
I know. How is that?
How is that possible?
I don't know. It was a busy few days.
I know. And I had a friend who reached out to me and she said, I can't believe you were in Fort Worth and you didn't tell me. We should have got together. And I said, I didn't have time to get together with one more person.
Yeah, it was packed. It was great. It was great.
You've been before.
I have. I've been several times, actually. But that was just so refreshing to be in a room with 13,000 people.
It was a big room, right?
It was a big room, and I think it just visually reminds you that there's a lot of people who really do love Jesus, or at least want to know him a little bit more. And so it was really encouraging to be there.
Yeah, I loved every part of it. I thought the teaching was outstanding. Mm-hmm. I know we shouldn't pick favorites, but did you have one that just really hit you?
Oh gosh, that is hard. They just were, of course, Friday night, was probably just really moving for me. I've loved everything about Christine Cain's presentation, but then, when we got to Catherine Wolfe, and, I've read her books and I just have such a respect for her. And of course, she talked about John chapter 9. And
she did, didn't she?
Yeah.
See,
so,
I even forgot
we were like kindred spirits there, even though we weren't talking to each other. But Sadie, Sadie brings me hope for the next generation of Christian leaders. So I love her transparency, and to be able to see her reaction to that video of her going to Guatemala.
Oh,
I was just undone with the whole thing. So
that whole thing.
It was beautiful. It was just beautiful and very inspiring, very motivating. So I really felt like it was a joy to be there and be a part of it.
Yeah, I felt the same way. And I loved, I thought Catherine was exceptional. Mm-hmm. Every time I've seen her speak, mm-hmm. I'm always inspired, but I thought she just hit it out the park.
Yes.
And
she's got such a beautiful sense of humor in the midst of all that she goes through.
She is hilarious.
Yeah.
She is hilarious.
She keeps it real.
She does. And today I asked my friends that I traveled with, because we're hosting an If Local, and I said, I need your top 4. And everybody is totally like we have a hard time on the fourth one, but Catherine and Sadie are definitely top two, and we all want Christine.
Yes. As a next door neighbor, preferably.
I mean, I just want her as a running buddy. I'm just like, man, you are. She's like she is an evangelist.
Yeah, I think my fourth would be Jada.
I loved Jada too.
So maybe I may have to pop in at your If Local. I just loved it all. So
I know. I can't wait. I'm going to talk to Stephanie about it on Monday.
Oh, good.
And see. I haven't got her four of what she thinks is must. But when we go to the vault, we're both like Jill Briscoe.
Yes, I love Jill Briscoe. Man, I miss her. But yeah, Jada's the top one for me. So that's a hard choice. Picking four. Whew.
Yes. All right. Well,
better you than me on that.
I know. So, Mary Beth, let's get into this chapter. So, get us going.
Absolutely. Well, before I have you read, I do want to share a little, just a little personal experience I had with this chapter. I don't know, Julie, probably literally 25 years ago. I don't know if I want to count how many years ago, but I had little kids and life was really busy, and I really had this deep call of ministry. But, it's hard when your kids are little and you're trying to gather all people and keep all people going, and at the same time really feel like you're making a difference, in people's lives on behalf of the Lord. And I sat down to read John chapter 9, and I knew the story of this incredible healing, but I could not get past the first 4 words of this chapter where it says, as he went along. And those words jumped out at me because I just think the humanity of Jesus really hit me that day, that like he had places to go, he had things to do. And yet as he went along doing the things he had to do, he was available to impact a life along the way. And so I grabbed those 4 words and started using them in my prayer time. And I would say, okay, Lord, like you see everything on the calendar, but as I go along, I want to be available to however I may be able to pause or say something encouraging to someone or whatever you want me to be a part of, because just like Jesus had places to go and things to do, we do too.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we think it has to be this very premeditated moment that we've planned and prepared for. And that was really hard to make happen when you have so many little ones. I'm sure a lot of your listeners have little ones at home. And they're like, listen, I kept everybody alive today. That was my job, So I just really appreciate using those words in my prayer time when I do feel really busy and just saying, okay, Lord, as I go along with what I think is on my calendar today, I really want to be available to whoever I might, run across, that our time together could be meaningful for your purposes. So I love this chapter because of the way it starts and then, of course, how it unfolds. So I'd love for us just to read those first 5 verses to get us started.
Okay. So as he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Neither this man nor his parents sinned, said Jesus, but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. As long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. And while I am in the world, I am the light of the world.
There's that passage.
There's
from
that
last
I
week.
am again. Yes.
So Jesus and the disciples are just along their way, and they notice a blind man. And immediately, the disciples want to know why he was blind. And they just assume that it was from somebody's sin. And, this really reminds me, Julie, that we just crave explanations and understanding to help us make sense out of what really doesn't make sense or what feels scary or unfair. And I do believe that the enemy of God can really captivate us with a good why conversation, and rarely does it end well. It usually results in worry or confusion or fatigue just from thinking so much, or even hopelessness, which makes the heart sick. Sometimes I have said to so many people in the work I do that why questions really remind me of the carbs that we crave. We crave them, but we're not satisfied for very long. Explanations might give us a moment of relief, but generally, answers to why questions actually don't heal us, but we know that God will. So instead of asking why, maybe you've heard that before, let's just ask what. What am I feeling here? What am I afraid of? What am I worried about? What is God doing here? What do I notice about God in situations that don't make sense or they do seem unfair? And what I've really landed on is if we believe in our heart, in the heart of God, that it's only good, if we really believe the heart of God is only good, then we can trust He is always up to good, even when we can't see the good right now. And so the question, what, is answered right here. You probably know this, Julie, because you've known me for a while, that two of my favorite words in all of the Bible are so
yes.
that.
Yes.
You probably remember I have a painting in my wall at home, actually, that says so that. And I love so that because it does give us a little insight as to what God is doing. And here, He is telling us that what He is doing is displaying the works of God. So why was this man born blind? He was born blind so that the works of God might be displayed in him. Sin is not the point here. God is. We were created to reveal God through our very unique lives and all that that might entail. And for this man, it included his blindness. In the email that you send out this week, the lesson will draw attention to that phrase that Jesus uses here, we must do the works of Him who sent me. I love that. Can you just imagine being there when Jesus was including them, saying we must do this? But for now, let's move past that, and you'll get that in the lesson, and let's take a look at what Jesus does do and how this man responded. Can you read verses 6 and 7?
I can. But I want to ask you a question.
Yes.
Can I do that?
Yes.
I'm going to interrupt your whole flow. But one thing that I was thinking about, this man was sitting here and probably hearing this discussion.
Absolutely.
And when God, Jesus answered the why question. He gives the answer.
Yes.
In this case, I think that man, that was like just life-changing, just in that moment.
It might have been. It also might have been, wait a minute, what the heck? Like, you're going to display something in me? Like, just because he gave him that answer doesn't mean the man is not still devastated. He's blind, right?
No, when I was thinking about it earlier today, I was thinking, would I have been mad?
Right. Would
And
I feel a little used?
Would I feel like God was using me?
Yeah, I think if you don't know him, you might really be concerned about that.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and he doesn't know these people that are saying any of these things.
Yeah, they're all just talking about
That's
him,
exactly
and he's
right.
not, he's like, here I am, but you're talking about me like I'm not here.
I think we can imagine that happened to him a lot.
I imagine it probably did
I
too.
mean, he's likely there begging for money, and, I'm sure a lot of people had things to say about him as they passed him by. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, it's a really interesting question that we all want to know why things happen.
We do.
We do. It's instinctive.
But they don't help us.
They don't usually heal us. They might give us a moment, just like those carbs, right? Like, I'm sure popcorn is going to solve my problem for today. But 30 minutes later, I'm still looking for a better solution.
Right. Exactly.
So,
Okay, so I will go on and read 6 and 7.
yes.
After saying this, he spit on the ground, made some mud with the saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. Go, he told him, wash in the pool of Siloam. This means sent. So the man went and washed and came home seeing.
Yeah, I just want us to sit with this for a minute and imagine this man who is blind, begging for money like he probably has done on most days, or at least many days. And now randomly, he has mud on his eyes, and a stranger has told him to go wash his eyes in this pool of water that means sent. And it's not likely that this pool was just right there. It was likely a little bit of a distance where he would have to go. And so I just want us to think about this for a minute, Julie. What do you think was going on with this man's thinking even in that moment? Obviously, he's heard some discussion about him, and now somebody has put mud on his eyes. We do know that saliva was used for medicinal purposes then, but to me, I feel like this man was just this was very random for him.
Well, I mean, first of all, I'm thinking like about just what that felt like.
Yes.
It's like someone just took, okay, they're having a conversation about you, and now they're putting he put his hands on you.
Right.
He just rubbed something on your face, on your eyes. And this place of like, you know, a source of pain because you can't see.
Right.
And now he's just highlighting it. And he's giving you these marching orders and telling you to go. And what I know about in the southern part of Jerusalem, the path that led to this was a very busy path. So he's like, I'm going to now I would like for you to go walk on this really busy street where all these people are. And I want you to navigate to this pool.
Yes.
I think I would feel a little frustrated and a little inconvenienced and a little bit like, couldn't you just give me some change and just, you know, because he didn't know what was going to happen.
No, he had no idea. I really can't imagine what he was thinking. Part of me wants to hope that maybe he had some level of anticipation of something, but the other part of me, probably the part that I would feel connected to, is like being irritated, you know, like, I don't know. Do you think he felt like he might even be mistreated, like bullied? Like, what was this like? I just think it's so fascinating to try to put ourselves in his shoes, which we really probably can't. Both of us can see. Neither one of us are sitting on a street asking for money, so we can't fully relate to this man's life and to his situation. But I'm amazed that this man did exactly what Jesus said, and he came home different. And yet, what we really notice here is that people won't always get what God is doing. And most of the time, Julie, opposition follows where God is working. Why don't you read this next little, we know his neighbors, I can't even imagine. These neighbors don't know it's him. Everybody's talking about him. He's hearing all this. He's insisting it's me. Why don't you read for us, starting at verse 8, go down to verse 25.
Okay. So his neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, "Isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg?" Some claimed that he was. Others said, "No, he only looks like him." But he himself insisted, "I am the man." "How then were your eyes opened?" they asked. He replied, "The man they called Jesus made some mud and put it on my eyes. He told me to go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed, and then I could see." "Where is this man?" they asked him. "I don't know," he said. They brought to the Pharisees the man who had been blind. Now the day on which Jesus had made the mud and opened the man's eyes was a Sabbath. Therefore the Pharisees also asked him how he had received his sight. "He put mud on my eyes," the man replied, "and I washed, and now I see." And some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath." But others asked, "How can a sinner perform such signs?" So they were divided. Then they turned again to the blind man. "What have you to say about him? It was your eyes he opened." The man replied, "He is a prophet." They still did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they sent for the man's parents. "Is this your son?" they asked. "Is this the one you say was born blind? How is it now that he can see?" "We know he is our son," the parents answered, "and we know he was born blind. But how he can see now, or who opened his eyes, we don't know. Ask him. He is of age, and he will speak for himself." His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders, who had already decided that anyone who acknowledged that Jesus was the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. That was why his parents said, "He is of age, ask him." A second time, they summoned the man who had been blind. "Give glory to God by telling the truth," they said. "We know this man is a sinner." He replied, "Whether he is a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see." Wow.
I know. I just think about this man. I've thought about him so much. And rather than people celebrating that he can see for the very first time in his life, They don't believe him. They talk about him. They talk about him around him. There he is, just insisting, it really is me. He was so misunderstood and so pressured to say what people wanted to hear. And yet, Julie, I learned so much from this man's response. First, he did not explain Jesus. He simply shared his story. And he was willing to say, I don't know, when he didn't have the answers that they wanted. We can't always explain what God is doing or why he's doing it. It is a journey of faith, which includes elements of mystery. God's Spirit will open the eyes of people to truth. And yet here we have in this story the religious leaders, the Pharisees, interrogating him in both their disbelief and their hostility towards Jesus. They had made up their mind. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been this understanding that anyone who placed their faith or acknowledged that Jesus was the Messiah would be kicked out of the synagogue. The Pharisees were not satisfied with his answers. They asked his parents. His parents were so afraid, they said very little, only telling them the bare minimum. Before then, they said, you need to go ask him. They were so afraid of being thrown out. After the parents don't satisfy the Pharisees, they go back to this man who had been healed, and guess what? His story remains the same. He does not change his story to satisfy them. And in verse 28, they hurl insults at him. This is so painful for us to consider. Will you read those verses 30 through 34?
The man answered, "Now that is remarkable. You don't know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners. He listens to the godly person who does his will. Nobody has ever heard of opening the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." To this they replied, "You were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us?" And they threw him out.
So this man still doesn't know who Jesus is. He doesn't know he's the Son of God. And yet he is showing more respect for God than the leaders of the religious community. He is giving credit to God for healing him without knowing very much at all about Jesus. That is humbling. Today, Julie, I think you and I would probably both call what the Pharisees did spiritual abuse. It included accusation, intimidation, abuse of their power, certainly entitlement. And it can be devastating when a church leader abuses their power and position and harms people emotionally, mentally. It's so sad when someone who does not identify as a Christian behaves better than a spiritual leader in the church. Tell me a little bit about your thoughts, Julie, about this spiritual abuse, because we certainly hear more about it today and talk about it probably a little bit more freely and honestly than I think perhaps past generations have done.
Yeah, I mean, it is a real hot topic. I feel empathy because I've experienced that spiritual abuse, things that I would call spiritual abuse, and authority being used to motivate actions by fear. And I really, you were using words like intimidation and, get in line, or this is going to happen. And really, when you think about in that situation, they were under this Roman oppression. Really, the only thing they had freedom for was their religion.
Right.
And now that was something that was being threatened, that they could lose access to God.
Yes.
And how painful that is. And we live where it's like church scandal. I mean, I myself, we've talked about in my past, I come from an authoritarian church system that was, I think, definitely abusive. The very next church that I went to after being delivered from a cult was a church that was rocked by a scandal. It would have been very easy for me to just give up on God. because of the things that I was seeing and experiencing. But just like this man, I knew something about God that just kept drawing me back to him.
Right.
Because the church should be like the reflection of God, revealing God in society. And like you said, it is really disheartening when you see people who are like firmly against Jesus, but they are behaving with more dignity and kinder, and not speaking down to people.
Right.
And so we see that in the church. We see it outside of the church.
Yeah.
We see people who, it's hard because it turns people away. People who need Jesus.
Absolutely. Their hostility. There were these Pharisees were just so hostile with him.
Yeah.
This man was so vulnerable.
Yeah.
He can see, and he doesn't know how it happened.
He has been on an emotional roller coaster
Exactly.
in this whole chapter. And his parents, that is especially tender, that his parents would shove him out there they should have been throwing him a party.
Yeah.
There should have been celebration in all of Jerusalem. Everyone who was hearing the testimony that this had happened, there should have been a ticker tape parade. It should have been a time of great joy and rejoicing, and that's not what happened.
No. It's absolutely heartbreaking. I'm thinking about the neighbors. Like, your neighbor can't even be like, wow, this is amazing. Tell me everything. How did this happen? And no. They're all totally, I don't know if they were against him, but they were not for him.
They were not
him. Celebrating, And so let's just sit with this for a minute, because I don't want us to think like we can't have a moment like these Pharisees. As much as I don't think I would ever be this aggressive, I do have to pause and just ask myself about when I might be afraid I'm wrong, right? Like, these Pharisees had their mind made up, and they're really afraid that the Messiah is not, this is not what we're looking for here.
Yeah.
Right? And so if they know that Jesus, the Messiah, healing a man who's born blind, is part of the revelation of him as the Messiah, they're not happy about this. And now they're tapping into that possibility of, oh, wait a minute, we can't be wrong. We can't be wrong. And so they begin to get more judgmental and more condemning of people. And so they were very much micromanaging leaders, and nowhere in the scripture are we called to micromanage people. So I have to sit with this and just ask myself, okay, when am I having a little bit of moments like that? Because what I do know is that fearful people have trouble hearing.
Yeah.
They just do, right? We are, even the way our brains function, Julie, when we are in that fight or flight, the part of our brain that processes very rational information is very foggy. And so thinking about that, I'm recognizing I need to be mindful when I am in a fearful state that maybe I'm wrong or something is not the way my theology didn't think that was true, right? I can have a moment like that. And how do I then behave? What do I do in my interactions with people if all of a sudden what I've always believed to be true is being confronted?
Yeah, I don't want to go there, but I'm going to have to, because I think what has happened in our country, in the church and outside of the church, in like a political state, and we've brought so much politics into the church that it's so divisive.
Yes.
It is really dividing us against one another. I think I used to be firmly in one camp, and the last two election cycles, I started going, wait a second. This is not right. This is not Christ-like. This is not, I can't go along with this. And beginning to speak up a little bit, but then also just feeling grieved over how blind I had been and how I had made that an idol. And there were things that there were political positions and things that I was much more invested in than I was invested in the Great Commission. And that was really, really hard to kind of sit with and to think about.
Yeah, I really appreciate you saying that. That's really, really helpful. I think what I really look at in this part of this man's story and with these leaders is I'm looking at their fruit. Mm-hmm. I'm looking at the fruit of the Pharisees, and it is abusive.
It is.
It is unkind. It is dismissive of an absolute pure miracle that, yes, Jesus did. And it is dismissive of a person that he created for the purpose of himself being glorified through. So I think we pay attention to our fruit.
Yeah, we do.
And I just know if I got some anxiety fruit, then I need to pause for a minute and I need to first just calm myself down so that I can make sure what I know to be true about God stays at the forefront. And when we are heightened emotionally, sometimes that truth is a little foggy, right?
Well, and just speaking back to fear, I realized that I was being pressured to vote by people who were using fear against me. Mm. And that's never the right decision. If fear is what is driving us,
yes,
that is a big problem.
Yes.
And so then I began to, examine not only my fruit, but just some of the fruit on the tree. And you're like, whoa, this tree, there's a lot of rotten fruit here.
Yeah.
We need to, and so, we definitely, I can't do anything out there, but I can bring my rotten fruit to Jesus.
Amen.
And I can ask him to open my blind eyes where I've been blind, because there is a reason in the Sermon on the Mount where it's we're always trying to pull that plank out of somebody else's eye,
right? And
we can be very, very blind. And I think I keep, as we're doing this podcast, I keep pulling the readers on and off because I need the readers to read, but I also can't see you well.
Yes.
And so I think that we do that.
Oh yeah, that's such a good illustration. And think about the fruit on these parents. They basically threw their son under the bus and said, y'all go talk to him.
They need some therapy now.
Well, I'm sure afterwards they're like, what did we just do? I hope they did.
I hope they did. I hope they apologized.
We don't know that, people. We don't have that insight. But the whole thing, right? Look at your fruit. Let your fruit tell you something about yourself. Fruit is a Christian biblical phrase for self-awareness, Well, the Pharisees didn't hear this man. They didn't accept the undeniable truth of his testimony. But my favorite part of this story, Julie, is next. Will you read verses 35 through 38?
Jesus heard that they had thrown him out, and when he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" "Who is he, sir?" the man asked. "Tell me so that I may believe in him." Jesus said, "You have now seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking with you." Then the man said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshiped him. The best part.
Oh my gosh, this just totally melts my heart.
Yeah.
And Julie, this right here is how I see Jesus every day. Yeah. I see him seeking the hurting, seeking the confused, seeking the one who's rejected. And yet, with this deep desire for them to know him, he seeks them so that they will know him, so that they will never be alone, and they will know that they can trust he is for them as he is with them. And, I have this little phrase that when I first felt a call into serving the Lord, I really, I still was at a place in my journey where I thought there were just a few people who had the red phone that connected them to God, and I did not have the red phone.
Yes.
But the more I studied the scripture and I realized he really wanted to use a lot of messy people in that we, just like he invited them, that we get to do the works. My whole little motto was, Lord, I just want people to know you care. I just want people to know you care, because I feel like, well, the scriptures tell us perfect love casts out fear, right?
Yeah.
So when I see this man in this moment where he has done nothing, he didn't ask for the initial healing, he couldn't get anybody around him to just pause and go, wow, I'm so happy for you. Like there was nothing going on that was as this man anticipated the day to unfold. And as soon as he gets shunned, Jesus is right there.
Yeah.
Jesus is right there. It's how I see God in the garden when he goes right to Adam and Eve, when they have also felt the tension of shame and guilt. And what I also love about this moment, not just recognizing Jesus sought him initially to heal his physical blindness without him asking for it. What I really see here is that he gave this man very specific instructions, both for his healing, just go wash that off in the pool. And now he gives him very specific instructions spiritually in a way that this man could understand and obey. And that is so powerful to me, that he's not going to give us instructions that we are totally unable to grasp or do. He's going to make sure we can do anything he asks us to do. He will give us everything we need to do what he has for us to do. And so here he is, knowing that this man feels rejected, and he goes right to him in a very simple way, gives him the greatest healing that we could ever receive in life, in that gift of salvation, to heal him from the pain of shame, rejection, not being accepted or wanted. This shows us how much Jesus cares. And again, if I could get anyone out there who's listening who's not been sure that Jesus cares, who's more concerned that Jesus is keeping track of all their shortcomings, mistakes, sin, like that is not the point of this story. Jesus wants him to know him. And that's just beautiful.
It is.
So let's talk a little bit about this progression of faith for this man, because he's gone through quite a bit before he really actually now knows that Jesus is the Son of Man. What do you think about when you see just how he has grown through this story?
I just think about how simple it was. He didn't try to give anything beyond the facts of what had happened. He wasn't grasping for things, but still you see him defending someone that he doesn't even really know yet, in questioning, oh, do you want to follow him too? I mean, I don't even know him, but it seems like you want to follow, you're curious about him, and they're so put off by that. I think some of the things that he says, like, you know, surely he's a prophet. He has to be a prophet at least.
Right.
Bare minimum. And God doesn't listen to sinners. So, you know, I don't know, you know, whatever you're saying about him, all I know is he does the will of God. I love that phrase too.
Yes.
When he's like, he's someone who does the will of God. That's who God listens to. And that's what this man is doing, because we know from the beginning of the story that he had been chosen by God for this, really a burden, a heavy burden to carry of being born blind. And it must not have made him bitter, because he's so teachable. And he just that obeying and going and then coming. And then as soon as Jesus initiates and asks him that question, do you know the Son of Man?
Yes.
And he's like, I want to, sir.
Yes.
Like, tell me who he is, sir. Tell me who he is.
Yeah.
And then he's revealing. He's like, I am him. I'm the Messiah. He is the one who is speaking with you. I love that phrase, because everybody else who has spoken to him has been mean.
Yep. So many people have been mean to this man.
But this tender, loving Savior is standing in front of him, his little lost sheep, and he's like, friend, you're looking at him.
Right. This man was so blessed because he only knew Jesus as good.
Yeah.
That's all.
That's it.
He has to be doing the will of God, because like all he does is good.
Yeah.
And I didn't ask him for this. He just did this for me. It's beautiful. I really want all of the world to see Jesus through the lens of this man's story, how much he cares, how much he is initiating healing in our lives, a healing that's far greater than what we know we need or what we would ever think to even ask God for. It's incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is.
I really am glad you invited me to talk with you about John chapter 9.
I know it's
because it's an incredible story.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Okay, well, Mary Beth, that has been just an awesome treat to talk about my favorite healing in John. It's just that progression of faith and just this, like you said, revealing Jesus for who Jesus really is. And this is how we want the world to see Jesus and to know Jesus. And whatever I have to do and whatever you have to do, whatever we have to do to conform to his image so that we can reveal Jesus in this way, that's a high calling.
It's a very high calling.
And it's a great privilege.
Yes.
So thank you so much for teaching us today at this table, and you will love the lesson. I, of course, have got to do her study lesson already, and it is so good. I had such good time. I just took a little bit of time each day and worked through a section of it, so I got to really sit with this chapter for a week or longer, actually, because I've been, anticipating it, and I love it so much. So, friends, I hope you take the time to do that as well. But Mary Beth, we like to wrap up with a bright spot here, and I think that our bright spots are probably going to flow right out of this chapter because we've loved it.
They are. Tell me yours first.
Okay, mine is going back to verse 3, that we must do the works. Okay, I love that. I love that I am invited into the work of Jesus, the work of God, that God, like that verse in Ephesians about that he has planned good works for me to do for every believer. I mean, that's one of my life verses. It's an anchor. And yesterday I was serving at a ministry that I work with, Refuge for Women, and we were at Asbury Seminary. And I got to meet a lady who works for Wycliffe Bible translators. And so she and I were having this conversation, and she was asking me, of course, about Refuge, and I was asking her, like, well, what do you do? Or like, I thought maybe she was there in seminary, and she actually, I think her husband was, but so she was telling me about what she was doing. And I just said, I love that you work for Wycliffe. I said, getting the Bible translated into every people's language so that everybody has access to the Word of God is one of my passions. And I told her, I said, I think Wycliffe is partnered with Illuminations. And she said, yes, do you know about Illuminations? I said, oh, I do. I said, I love what you're doing. And this is my small part. This is the work that God has given me to do, is I get to financially support Illuminations. And I said, I get to help translate 2 verses every month with my small contribution. And I said, and I'm so excited. I was just beaming, and she was excited because I'm sure that encouraged her. I hope it did. And so we were just having this blast talking about, and I was like, the Word of God brings sight.
Yes.
To the blind. And you are doing amazing work. So I loved it. That was my bright spot.
That is a bright spot. Well, my bright spot did come from this passage, and I think I can articulate it. I'm not 100% sure, but I was just sitting and really thinking about this man, just thinking about his life and about his experience. And I think what really stood out to me was all he was really hoping for, Julie, was probably a couple of coins.
Yeah.
And Jesus had more for him. And I was having one of those weeks where it was decision overload. I have a lot of big decisions I'm in the middle of making. And so I think I was having a little bit of just that overall decision fatigue. And I just was so encouraged to realize I don't have to initiate it all. I don't have to make what I desperately need happen, that Jesus will take this initiative with me too. And I probably would be the one that would just want the coin and be good to go. And he has way more than we could ever ask or imagine. And I don't even necessarily need to know if that's true for something he's doing today. But when I see that that is who he is, that he wants to do immeasurably more than this man didn't know that sight was a possibility. He didn't know he needed salvation. He didn't know anything.
Yeah.
And we try so hard to figure it all out, so we make all the right choices and we do it all. And that striving is exhausting. And so it was so sweet the way the Lord said, hey, did you notice that he only received? He just received, and then he told his story. So how about if you go with that? Why don't you just receive? I'll initiate. I know what you need more than you know what you need. And all you have to do is tell about me and what I did, what I've done, whether it's this afternoon or maybe something bigger, but he simplified it for me. And immediately I felt this weight lifted off. It kind of reminded me, I think because of my headspace that day, of the proverb that talks about hope deferred makes the heart sick. And it was like hope was restored.
Yeah.
And I didn't have anything figured out at the end of that time with him, but I saw him in here saying, let me take the lead.
Yeah.
And I just released the reins once again, which, we have to do several times a day.
Only several?
Yes. But that was my bright spot. The day literally got brighter for me after that very early morning moment with him. So I'm grateful to this stranger story in this beautiful chapter of the book of John. I don't know this man, but this man's story of how Jesus walked with him and taught him and changed him has impacted me. And so that was a bright spot.
Oh my goodness, that is an incredible bright spot, because oftentimes we think that the real bright spots are our answered prayers, but the brightest spot is always spending time with Jesus and having an intimate encounter. That is the brightest spot.
That's exactly right.
That's what prayer is all about.
Yeah.
It's about a relationship with this God. And friends, this is the God you want to follow. This is the table flipper. And I just pray that you will keep following the table flipper and leave the table flipping to Jesus.